Oh my God, Hollywood is shaking right now because Blake Lively's entire case may be about to collapse. Judges are weighing whether to unseal a secret declaration that could expose everything, and the fallout will be massive. We are talking reputations. On the line, careers in jeopardy, and a scandal that could reshape Hollywood forever. Stay tuned because what is about to be revealed will change everything. It has been a whirlwind unlike anything we have seen before a week. So wild that even those who thought they had already witnessed the most shocking twists in this legal saga were left stunned and breathless. And as I sit here recounting the details, I keep telling myself to remember this moment, because these are the moments people look back on at the end of their lives when they think about how intense and unpredictable things once were, the kind of moments that change the course of stories forever. And what makes this even more unbelievable is that Blake Lively, who has already been at the center of headlines and storms, now finds herself tangled in a web of revelations, contradictions, and courtroom drama that could redefine everything she has claimed over the past year. Because remember, not too long ago, she stood firm, insisting that Wayfarer Studios and its allies had launched an attack on her, that they were not only dragging her into legal battles, but also constructing websites specifically to smear her and portray her in the harshest possible light. She painted a picture of a conspiracy, a PR stunt, a deliberate scheme to file lawsuits only as a tactic to destroy her reputation. And she even went so far as to claim she had proof, real proof of this hidden agenda. And that proof, she argued, lived inside encrypted signal chat conversations where the masterminds allegedly admitted their true motives. Now that sounded like a blockbuster revelation, the kind of bombshell you expect to shatter the courtroom walls. But when the veil was finally lifted, when those sealed conversations were partially revealed, the story that emerged was not the one Blake was counting on. And this is where everything takes a shocking turn, because instead of proving that the lawsuit was some malicious campaign, the chats told a very different story. They revealed lawyers strategizing over how to make their amended complaint accessible to the public, not by fabricating lies, not by concocting a smear site, but by simply hosting PDFs of already filed court records so that anyone curious enough could read them without paying court fees. Imagine that the very evidence Blake believed would show a grand conspiracy actually depicted attorneys painstakingly debating how to ensure that nothing inaccurate went out to the public, and how to protect private information by redacting names, phone numbers, and personal details. They discussed whether glitches in the PDF viewer might create misimpressions, and whether it was ethical to post documents if they didn't appear exactly as they had been filed in court. One attorney even demanded that the files be taken down temporarily when the pages appeared inconsistent across devices, because he refused to allow anything inaccurate to circulate. That is not the behavior of a group orchestrating a smear campaign. That is the behavior of professionals obsessed with accuracy. And it leaves us asking, if this is Blake's smoking gun, then where is the fire? Because the chats show a group of people worrying about glitches on phones while Blake presents it as proof of a conspiracy. This is where the suspense deepens, because once TMZ caught wind of the posted complaint and traffic began flooding the website with tens of thousands of readers downloading the documents, it became clear that the public was hungry for the truth. They wanted to see the evidence firsthand, without filters, without interpretations, and downloads skyrocketed into the hundreds of thousands. The site was never some flashy media stunt. It was a bare-bones landing page designed only to host the official filings. Yet, ironically, this simplicity gave it power. It looked less like a performance and more like an archive, and that credibility drew in the crowds. But here is the twist that makes jaws drop. While Blake accused Wayfarer of weaponizing the media, she herself had previously handed her own complaint to the New York Times, which promptly made it available online in the exact same way her opponents did. So the very act she condemns was an act she herself had already engaged in. And when you see both sides mirrored like that, you cannot help but feel the ground shake beneath the narrative Blake has been building. Because suddenly the accusations no longer line up with the evidence, and instead of standing on solid ground, she finds herself on quicksand. The more she fights, the deeper she sinks. And as the chats revealed lawyers calling Brian Friedman the Terminator as they joked about the tenacity of their filings, it only heightened the sense of drama. These were not villains plotting in the shadows. They were professionals trying to maintain accuracy and transparency, while protecting sensitive information from being exposed. The suspense in all of this lies not only in what the chats reveal, but in what they fail to reveal. Because nowhere in these conversations is there evidence of Blake's central claim that this was all a smear campaign. Nowhere is there an admission that the lawsuit was filed. In bad faith, instead, we see an effort to provide transparency and to do so carefully, cautiously, with checks and balances. And that makes you wonder, how will Blake spin this now? Because if the very proof she promised collapses under the weight of its own details, then what cards does she have left to play? And what happens when the judge, who already agreed to redact certain identifiers, reviews these revelations and realizes that the narrative of a grand conspiracy may not hold water at all? This is why the tension is building so high, because the stakes are not just about whether a PDF was hosted on a website, but about whether Blake's credibility can survive when the foundation of her claims begins to crack. And if history has taught us anything in these Hollywood legal dramas, it is that once the cracks appear, the collapse can come quickly and mercilessly, leaving reputations in ruins and futures uncertain. And we are only at the beginning of that collapse now. The real unraveling has just begun. And as the curtain pulls back further, the next shocking layer of this unfolding saga reveals itself. Because while the signal chats dominate the headlines, and while Blake Lively insists on framing them as evidence of a sinister scheme, the deeper reading of those same documents creates a very different picture. And it is one that shakes the foundations of her entire narrative. You see in those conversations among the attorneys and executives, there was constant concern over making sure that the documents they shared publicly were exact mirrors of what had been filed in court. There was a repeated refrain that accuracy mattered above all else, that no glitch or formatting issue could be allowed to distort the truth, and one executive even went so far as to halt the launch when the PDFs were loading inconsistently across devices, because in his words, they could not allow a single error to undermine the credibility of the filings. Think about that for a moment, because if their goal had truly been to smear Blake, why would they worry so obsessively about accuracy? Why would they slow themselves down, double-check, and even pull content offline temporarily just to avoid the risk of misrepresentation? That is not the hallmark of a smear campaign. It is the hallmark of a legal team determined to ensure that their public records stood unshakable in the face of scrutiny. And here is where the suspense grows even tighter, because at the very same time Blake was presenting her declaration claiming that these filings were designed to smear her, she herself was engaging in behavior that mirrored exactly what she accused her opponents of doing. She submitted a complaint to the CRD and then allowed that complaint to be given to the New York Times, which then posted it online for anyone to read. And it carried the weight and presentation of an official lawsuit hyperlink and all. So the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. And once that hypocrisy is exposed, the viewer, the reader, the court begins to wonder what else might not line up in Blake's story. And then we turn to the anonymous declaration she filed, in which an individual claimed to have been verbally abused by Justin Baldoni, but insisted that their identity remains sealed. And here lies another fascinating twist. Because while the court may be sympathetic to protecting the privacy of individuals in sensitive matters, the fact that this declaration has already been circulated in the media raises serious questions about intent. Was this meant to be a genuine contribution to the case, or was it always destined to create publicity, coverage, and speculation regardless of the individual's anonymity? The declaration has been described in headlines, dissected by commentators, and debated across social media, and the request to keep it sealed comes not only from a place of privacy, but also from a recognition that this case has become a media circus where any new filing becomes fodder for endless speculation. And here is where the dramatic tension peaks, because the court must now weigh whether protecting one anonymous declarant outweighs the public's right to see the evidence and the contradictions pile up. Blake argues that she does not want this to be a PR war, yet she files documents that she knows will be dissected in the press. She insists that Wayfarer orchestrated a smear campaign, yet the evidence suggests the opposite. And in the middle of this contradiction stands the judge, faced with decisions that could swing the momentum of this entire case one way or another. And it is not just Blake and Wayfarer who are caught in this storm, because in another courtroom, a related case spins off with Stephanie Jones taking aim at Baldoni Wayfarer tag, and a host of others alleging that a mysterious website titled Stephanie Jones Leaks was crafted as a weapon against her. But here, too, the details unravel in surprising directions, because depositions reveal that the website may not have been designed by Baldoni or Wayfarer at all, but rather proposed on behalf of an entirely different high-profile client, one not even involved in the lawsuit, and the names speculated are staggering: Jeff Bezos, Lauren, Sanchez, The Rock, Tom Brady, all figures who once had connections with Stephanie Jones, and all figures who may have had grievances of their own. Yet their identities remain sealed under the strict designation of attorney's eyes only. And this secrecy only deepens the mystery and fuels speculation. And yet again, we are left with the same theme. The accusations are grand sweeping and dramatic, but the evidence is elusive, evasive, and perhaps misdirected. Because if Justin Baldoni was not even involved in the creation of the site, then the accusations fall apart just as Blake's accusations about the Signal chats collapsed under scrutiny. And this leads us into an even more astonishing realization that Justin himself has been almost entirely hands-off throughout these controversies, despite being the founder of Wayfarer Studios and listed as a managing member. His fingerprints are almost nowhere in these communications. The decisions, the strategies, the crisis management all appear to be driven by Jamie Heath and the executive team, while Justin remains at the periphery, a figurehead more than a puppet master. And that revelation disrupts the narrative Blake has tried to weave, because her accusations paint Justin as the schemer, orchestrating campaigns in the shadows. Yet the evidence shows him absent, disengaged, almost detached from the operational decisions, and that contradiction builds the suspense to unbearable levels. Because if the villain of the story is not pulling the strings, then who is? And if the entire premise of the smear campaign is built on misinterpretation, then what is really left standing? This is why the audience cannot turn away from this saga. Because every time a claim is made, the documents tell a different story. And every time a dramatic revelation is promised, the result is a quiet unraveling that leaves Blake's case looking shakier than before. And in the world of Hollywood reputations, once cracks appear, they spread like wildfire, threatening to consume everything in their path, and now the cracks are spreading wider than ever. The story grows darker and more complex as each filing reveals more than the last, because what started as a simple claim of a smear campaign has now spiraled into a labyrinth of contradictions, sealed declarations, secret clients, and mounting speculation. And the deeper you dive, the more you realize that the very foundation Blake Lively has built her defense on might be crumbling beneath her feet. And what makes this all the more captivating is that the evidence itself seems to push the narrative in directions no one anticipated take. For example, the frenzy that erupted when TMZ caught hold of the amended complaint. The very document Blake insisted was crafted in bad faith suddenly became one of the most downloaded public records of the year, with more than 800,000 downloads and over 11,000 live viewers in just half an hour. That kind of organic traction cannot be staged. It cannot be manufactured. It reflects genuine public interest and curiosity. Yet Blake spins it as proof of a malicious scheme, when in reality the traffic was driven by people eager to see the actual filings, unfiltered, raw, and official. And that truth poses an uncomfortable question: if the public itself demanded to read the documents, how can the act of making them available be considered a smear campaign? Because in the modern era of transparency, what people trust most is access to primary sources, not commentary, not opinion, but the documents themselves. And that is exactly what Wayfarer did. They took documents already filed in court and made them available for free, bypassing the fees and paywalls that normally block access. And instead of earning money from the site, they refused to monetize it, insisting it was nothing more than a landing page to provide transparency. So where is the malice in that? Where is the conspiracy in that? And yet Blake stands by her narrative even as the contradictions grow louder. And then comes the revelation about Baldoni Files, a Reddit account allegedly tied to her own team, which appears to have been created as a countermeasure to fight back against Wayfarer's narrative. Here lies another twist, because while Blake accuses her opponents of creating websites to smear her evidence, suggests that her side may have been doing the exact same thing through Reddit, through curated posts, through attempts to sway public opinion. And if that is true, then the accusations become a mirror reflecting her own strategies back at her. And what is most shocking is how unprepared she seems for the discovery that every accusation she throws can be turned back around on her, because the Signal chats show one side carefully ensuring accuracy, while her own filings show attempts to protect anonymous declarants whose credibility cannot be tested in open court. And while Wayfarer is accused of fueling PR coverage, Blake's own declaration is described in headlines as exactly that, a PR stunt. And the suspense in all of this lies in what comes next, because the judge has not yet ruled on whether the anonymous declarant will remain sealed. And if the court decides to unmask the individual, the fallout could be catastrophic not only for Blake's credibility, but for the future. of her case because the individual may face scrutiny over their motives, their connections, their willingness to sign a declaration only under conditions of secrecy, and if their identity is revealed and their story fails to hold up under cross-examination, then the entire declaration collapses and Blake's case takes another devastating blow. And while all of this brews in one courtroom, Stephanie Jones is still fighting in another, demanding that depositions be unsealed to reveal the identity of a mysterious client who allegedly instructed that her website be built. But the attorneys for Wayfarer and others resist, arguing that the information is speculative and that revealing it would expose an innocent third party to harassment, speculation, and possibly lawsuits. And here is where the intrigue thickens, because whoever that client is, it is not Baldoni. It is not Wayfarer. It is someone else entirely. And if that is true, then Jones's case begins to unravel just as Blake's is unraveling, which means that both women may have built their accusations on the wrong foundations, targeting the wrong people and blaming the wrong sources. And if the courts conclude that both miscalculated, the consequences could ripple across Hollywood, damaging reputations, careers, and alliances. And in the midst of this storm, one detail keeps surfacing. Justin Baldoni himself is consistently absent from the decision-making, absent from the chats, absent from the strategies. His name appears, but rarely. And when it does, it is not as the driver, but as the figurehead, which leaves us with a haunting question. If Justin is not orchestrating the moves, if Wayfarer executives are steering the ship, and if Blake's claims cannot be substantiated, then who is really at the center of this drama? And why has Blake risked so much on a narrative that now appears to be cracking open and spilling out contradictions? And this is why the audience stays locked to the story, because every document, every deposition, every leaked chat adds a new twist, and with each twist the suspense builds, because you realize you are not watching a straightforward legal battle. You are witnessing a high-stakes Hollywood chess match, where one wrong move can topple the board entirely. And we are on the brink of seeing just that. A collapse that could send shockwaves through not only this courtroom, but the entire entertainment industry. And now the final chapter of this unfolding saga brings everything into sharp relief, because as the filings mount and the hearings loom, what is truly at stake is not just the reputations of Blake Lively or Justin Baldoni, but the credibility of Hollywood itself. The system of alliances, secrecy, and image control that has allowed celebrities to operate behind carefully constructed facades for decades is cracking under the pressure of transparency, and this case more than any other has exposed the fissures in that foundation, because the public is no longer content to consume curated narratives. They want receipts, they want the raw documents, they want the truth unfiltered. And in this climate, Blake's strategy of secrecy-sealed declarations and claims of conspiracy feels increasingly out of step with the cultural moment where openness wins trust and silence breeds suspicion. And what makes this even more fascinating is how the narrative has shifted from being a private dispute into a public referendum on accountability in Hollywood, because now commentators across platforms, from mainstream news outlets to TikTok creators to long-form YouTube analysts, are weighing in, dissecting every filing, every declaration, every deposition. And what they find consistently is that the evidence often tells a story far more nuanced than the PR statements allow. And yet Blake seems locked into her approach, doubling down on secrecy, even as cracks appear, while Baldoni's team leans into transparency, releasing documents, refusing to monetize the Wayfarer site, and arguing that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And this stark contrast only heightens the tension because it creates a moral binary in the eyes of the public. One side, accused of hiding; one side, accused of exposing. And while the courts may ultimately decide the legal outcome, the court of public opinion has already begun to render its verdict. And in that arena, the momentum is shifting against Blake. And here lies the irony, because her lawsuit intended to silence and control the narrative may have instead amplified it, giving her critics more ammunition and her supporters fewer defenses. And every time a sealed declaration is mentioned without being revealed, it becomes a source of suspicion. Every time she claims conspiracy without evidence, it becomes fuel for doubt. And the cycle feeds on itself, dragging her deeper into the very spotlight she sought to control. And what looms now is the next hearing, where the judge will decide whether to unseal the anonymous declaration and whether to compel disclosure of the mysterious client behind Stephanie Jones's claims. And both rulings have the potential to detonate like bombs, because if the declaration is unsealed and collapses, Blake's credibility could implode overnight. And if the client is revealed and proves to be unconnected to Baldoni or Wayfarer, Jones's entire case may collapse as well, leaving her exposed to countersuits and sanctions. And in that moment, the narrative shifts entirely from one of victimhood to one of reckoning and accountability. And this is the suspense that grips the public because everyone knows the moment is coming. The day of reckoning cannot be delayed forever, and when it arrives, the fallout will not be contained to one or two celebrities. It will ripple outward, touching agents, studios, networks, and brands, all of whom have tied their reputations to these figures and cannot afford to be dragged into scandal. And so the industry waits nervously while the public devours every twist, and the commentators prepare to dissect every ruling. And at the center of it all, Blake sits silent, determined to protect her image even as the walls close in around her. And Justin watches quietly, letting the documents speak for him. And Wayfarer continues to play the transparency card, confident that the truth is on their side, and it is this dynamic, this clash of secrecy and openness of control, an exposure that makes the story not just another celebrity lawsuit, but a cultural turning point, a moment when Hollywood's old ways of handling crisis may no longer work, because the audience has changed, the culture has changed, and the appetite for the truth has never been stronger. And so we end here on the edge of the storm, knowing that the next move, the next filing, the next unsealed declaration could change everything. And when it does, it will not just be a legal twist. It will be a seismic cultural event. And so as the dust settles for now, we are left staring at a Hollywood battlefield unlike anything we have seen before. Because this was never just about a lawsuit. It was about power. It was about truth. It was about the way narratives are shaped, controlled, and manipulated. And what this case has shown us is that no matter how carefully you craft an image, no matter how many allies you call upon, no matter how many declarations you seal or stories you spin, the truth has a way of breaking through because transparency has become the most powerful weapon in this cultural war. And as Blake Lively clings to her narrative, insisting that conspiracies and smear campaigns are destroying her reputation, the evidence itself seems to tell another story. A story of contradictions, of secrecy, of shadows cast where light should be. And at the same time, Justin Baldoni remains in the background, silent, measured, steady, while Wayfarer leans into openness, presenting documents to the public, refusing to hide behind curtains, and in doing so, earning credibility in a climate that rewards honesty over spin. And now the suspense lingers because we all know the next rulings could change everything. A judge could unseal the anonymous declarant and unravel the very foundation of Blake's case, or expose the mysterious client behind Stephanie Jones's claims. And in that moment, Hollywood will be forced to reckon with the fallout, and the industry itself may never look the same again because what began as a private dispute has evolved into a cultural reckoning. And whether Blake can survive it, or whether Baldoni emerges vindicated, the truth is, this story has already redefined the game, and nothing about fame, power, or control in Hollywood will ever be the same.